I want to give a shout out to Blackmores. Always got to support the underdog. You've always got to support people who are brave enough to stand up against the woke nonsense. Blackmores came out, and the guy from Blackmores, or one of the original founders, said he would be voting no for The Voice. Now, of course, that meant the left all had to pile on and try and boycott, blah, 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 all that rubbish.
Oh, you should see that.
So you do the opposite, folks. You go out and you support Blackmores. That's what you do. You show your support for them, because we will not be intimidated by these woke bullies, these virtue signalling types. Stand up for what you believe in, and if you happen to be the shareholder of a company, we tolerate those CEOs and others who stand up and make us listen to all their kind of left-wing garbage. So if someone stands up and says, oh, well, we'll be voting no for The Voice, support them if they happen to coincide with your views. Rita.
Well, I saw some of the Unhinged backlash to the founder of Blackmores and his position on this. Incredible to have someone of his standing and his to be just maligned in this demented way for stating an opinion that may in the end be shared by the majority of Australians, because the way this race-based referendum's going, it's got every chance of failing, particularly if the Liberal Party at some point, I don't know, in this century, come out with a position on it.
Well, you could not support The Voice if you read Jacinta Price's article in the Weekend Australia. You can go out and buy it now. Jacinta Price, who is the voice that we should be listening to on Indigenous affairs, brilliant mind in the Senate there, and she has written about the need to audit all the other voices that the Australian taxpayer has paid for the last 20, 30 years. This foundation, that group, this body, this lot. And she goes through forensically all the people who are pushing The Voice and saying, oh, you need more money to go to The Voice. They've been running these multi-million, sometimes multi-billion-dollar organisations specifically with heaps of money to look after Indigenous affairs, and they've failed. So how is The Voice, the new one, going to be any different when it's the same people with the same, wheelbarrows full of cash? How is it going to be any different? And Jacinta asks the question, if before we have a voice, let's have an audit of what the other voices have done. James.
Well, there are hundreds of bodies that provide advice to governments at the Commonwealth, federal and state level. Billions of dollars is spent on this. The quantum of money is massive. It is on the order almost of NDIS, of defence, that sort of money. And yet the progress on closing the gap is, negligible.
Shameful.
It's shameful. And how anybody who wants to have better results for Indigenous Australians can look at this history of failure and say, the problem with this history of failure is it hasn't been embedded in the Constitution.
Yes.
That's the problem. Well, that's a nonsense. And everything that we are seeing come out about this
is becoming a very popular argument for The Voice. I'm hearing this more and more when people are seeking detail and saying, how is this going to have any practical difference? The argument coming from The Voice advocates is, well, what we're doing now isn't working, so this is the solution. It's no, what you're proposing is enshrining what we're doing now into the Constitution, taking away any accountability, and just more of the same. So it's a very dishonest argument, but it's the one they're running with.
Well, you know what they should do?
What they should copy John Howard during the GST. So John Howard during the GST came out and said, right, we're going to bring in the GST, but we're going to scrap all these other taxes. The fact that they didn't is another story. So why doesn't Albo step up there and say, OK, I'm going to scrap all those bodies, every single one of them. As he said, there's billions of dollars worth of them. There's hundreds of these organisations. We're scrapping all of them tomorrow and we're putting in The Voice instead. Now, if you were serious, that's what you'd be doing. But of course they're not serious. It's a massive gravy train. And as Jacinta Price points out in a brilliant article, if you want to close the gap, stop creating an industry around people whose interest is in keeping that gap there. Because that's all you're doing.
This is the other thing, too. There's a great dishonesty among so many of the proponents of the voice, because on the one hand, they go out in public and say, this is a minor change. You will have no power. It will just be... And then you go, and then they go and they write academic papers. And the academic papers say, oh, no. This thing is going to have serious power. This thing, could potentially have a seat at cabinet. This could have all sorts of, and this will be powerful.
Business. And now wanted in every business.
And now, so you will have basically sort of Soviet-style indigenous commissars everywhere.
That's exactly what it is.
And Albanese gave the game away early when he said, "Oh, well, it'll be a brave parliament that ignores the voice." And so that's what this is about. And you only have to,
it would be a brave bureaucrat. It would be a brave everybody.
And you only have to look at what's happened in New Zealand, where the Treaty of Waitangi started out as a very nice sort of feel-good sort of thing in the same sort of way that they are pushing this thing here and saying, oh, no, it's no big deal. And then there were a couple of court cases that basically gave it all of these voice-like powers, and then suddenly everything became about race in New Zealand. It has divided the country. It has been a disaster for New Zealand. New Zealanders I've spoken to are warning Australians as loud as they can from across the ditch, saying, don't do this.
Yep. And we will be speaking later in the show to Shemeka Michelle and Benji Irby, two African Americans who are living in the racial division that is occurring in the United States, and they'll tell us exactly what happens when you start dividing people by race. If you want a harmonious Australia, vote no to the voice. That would be my advice.